This is Motivation. I'm Lori Joy Kingwell.
And I'm Chrissy Van. We're two dreamers on two wheels inspired by our community.
And celebrating the voices we're just lucky enough to discover along the ride. So if not already, like, subscribe, follow along, do what you gotta do to not miss an episode.
So when it comes to our motorcycles, nothing is more frustrating than if you have a breakdown. All of a sudden, you're brapping along and then something doesn't feel quite right. You have to pull over, stop traveling toward your destination, and you got to evaluate what the problem is. Sometimes the issue on your ride can be fixed, but because it needed some downtime, you did miss parts of your trip. Other times, you may be left with an issue that persists. That could mean you have to adapt and you have to ride completely different. You might have to cancel the trip you originally were on. Today's guest is Liz Zuback. This go-getter, she grew up in Thunder Bay, moved to Toronto, and eventually the lure of the West Coast won out as she now resides on Vancouver Island. Liz joins us to share her story of persevering through unplanned breakdowns in her life. She pursued her talents all throughout growing up as a performer right into university. But then with some damaged vocal cords, things took a turn. She pivoted, and she put that energy into bodybuilding, which also took her into chef school and nutrition. But then something, again, didn't feel quite right, but this time it was within her body. So in this episode, we're going to hear her story of the many breakdowns Liz has already faced through chronic pain, misdiagnosis, depression, anxiety, surgeries to follow, but ultimately her continued courage, commitment, and resolve to overcome each and become stronger because of them. And also the badass continued quest for quality of life and what that means when you have to adapt to the proverbial ride. This, my friends, is your motivation.
First of all, I want to commend you because it is not an easy space to step into to be like, I'm willing to be vulnerable over here. So
Yes.
Thank you, Liz, for joining us this morning.
Thank you both. It's such an honor to be here after being a listener for quite some time. It's very interesting to be on the other side of things.
Now, one thing that I found fascinating when you reached out is you were like, I don't know if it's fine because I only started riding last spring. First of all, fuck yeah, you're on two wheels and your entire life is going to continue to change in the best way possible.
Oh my gosh, it's been a journey. It has been the most thrilling and exciting, and I'm definitely hooked for sure.
Well, and I think one of the things that excites us the most learning about your story is the fact that getting on a motorcycle is something due to your health you physically didn't think would have been a probable thing that could have entered your sphere. So we're going to learn a little bit about this story. We're going to take you all the way back to that first time you hit in life when we know we're headed toward a certain direction. Obviously, as a performer, there is so much soul. When you're a vocalist, music is the thing that moves all of us. And when you have this innate, I like to call them special features. I don't have it. If you've heard me in karaoke, you definitely know that. But when you have this built-in special feature that you're willing to nurture, and I'm sure at that point had a plan to do something with that special feature of your voice, talk me through what happened there, because you were taking this to high level in university.
Yes. So years prior to that, I've been singing basically since I could start talking. My parents put me in choir. I sang in our church. There just wasn't a time really that I recall not singing. So it only felt right to go to university for that. So I did go to Lakehead University for classical music with a focus on vocals and my secondary instrument being piano. And yeah, I dedicated my life to music, and really the dream was to be on Broadway. Like that was the ultimate
incredible
goal. I absolutely love musical theater, and becoming somebody else for like a few minutes and just telling a story and really captivating people. So I knew that classical music wasn't really for me, but it's kind of that stepping stone, or like the ballet of dance, basically. So I remember we were all performing a choral performance, and the conductor was just asking for more power and sound from the choir. And being a solo performer, I kind of took it upon myself to push harder for the whole team. And I didn't feel it in that moment, but days and weeks afterwards, I started to slowly lose my voice and it became really difficult to talk. And I actually ended up sounding like a boy going through puberty. Like my voice completely changed.
Sounded like me then, just everyday me. So,
and then until the point where I lost it completely and I had to text everything or write down everything. But I still showed up to school and sat there, even though I couldn't do anything, and tried to keep learning. And eventually we worked on it to try and bring it back. But it's never quite been the same. Even having a conversation, my vocal cords can get pretty tired pretty quick.
What was kind of going through your head? Was there that fear factor of like, what does that mean? Or were you not willing to kind of go there? What was that looking like within your headspace?
Very scary, because at that point, singing was all I knew. And it was who I was associated as, especially in a smaller town. People know each other. And
Lori knows this well. North Battleford, Saskatchewan in the house.
Exactly, right? Yeah, Thunder Bay, Ontario. So everybody knew me as a singer, and that's all I really knew myself as. So to lose that felt like losing myself. Bit
of identity, right?
Yeah, I definitely have gone through a few identity crises in my 28 years on Earth.
Yeah.
So from that point, because I mean, it's really difficult when we're attached to something that we do and associate that with who we are. I think it's really natural. Almost, I think every single one of us in this conversation at some point in their lives experienced that. Definitely. And it's really something that's mentally difficult to work through, because you start to ask the question, who am I? What value do I have if I am not this? Because that's what I thought it was. So how did you work through that? Because I imagine you were probably hit with every emotion. And simultaneously, I think it's tough when you're like university age and you're also watching other people be able to go the direction or path you saw for yourself.
Yes. And that comes up again later in life when I go through my second identity crisis. So that really hits home for sure. I don't know how I quite got through it, but I recall finding the gym at that time, and I really didn't know what I was doing, but I still kept showing up there and started to realize that that could be like a form of therapy and working through things, as music always was for me. And I remember, and this woman always comes up whenever I talk about working out. I was in the co-ed area of our gym, and normally I worked out in the women's only. And there was this woman in the co-ed area, and she had so much muscle, and I had never seen a woman like this before. And I was like taken aback, and I was like, wow, like this woman looks so confident. She looks stunning. Like, I want to look like her. And I wanted to go up and talk to her, but I was extremely shy, like very, very shy. And my boyfriend at that time, I said, I want to go up and talk to her. And he said, you're not going to go do it. You're not going to go talk to her. I was like, no, I'm going to do it. I'm going to muster up the courage. So I walked over to her, and the only thing I could think of to say was, how can I look like you?
Stop. Yes. That's amazing.
And she was obviously like, just like so sweet. And
that made her very flattering.
Happy.
Do you know what I mean? Or just not even flattering. It just feels like, oh my gosh, what an incredible little moment to share.
Yeah. So she became my inspiration very quickly. And it was almost like she was a famous person in our gym. I would see her and she would forget my name, and I'd be like, it's Liz. And so we kept chatting, and eventually she started teaching me everything there was to know about working out and putting on size. And my mindset of always wanting to be small quickly changed to be, I want to take up space and I want to be bigger.
Yes.
Yeah. And she taught me everything I knew, and she coached me for my first bodybuilding show. and I competed in figure, and I wore her suit that she wore for her first show, and I got first. And everybody who's worn that suit has always gotten first. So it
Is
felt
that weird that I want to clap? Like I just started clapping, and I was like, "What?" Yeah,
so kind
that
of
is
like,
the coolest story.
to kind of answer your question, Chrissy, working out really helped me work through the fear and the sadness that I had with losing the ability to sing.
I appreciate that so much. I know it's something that Lori and I preach and subscribe to. And I really like how you defined it as well, as the mission wasn't to be small, it was to take up space, which ultimately translates to I want to feel strong, powerful, and empowered. Something has happened to me that was completely out of my control. And that happens in life. And those are normally the fucking things that take us at the knees and are hard to move through emotionally. And you found an outlet to allow all of that to move through you. And to a degree, you started to look at what can I control? And this was something that you're able to apply to yourself too. And as a fellow gym rat, like that's literally why I preach fitness so much. And I really think it's important to change how we define what it is for women, because I know through all the old advertisements, when you see when women first entered gym spaces, it was designed to basically create whatever a man would think that they want to look at, like or a decoration that needed to be refined. Whereas now I love seeing fellow women in the gym. And I also appreciate the interaction that you had with that individual, which I'm sure it's easy to feel intimidated when somebody has a certain physique, stature, or presence in a space. But to go up and share that space and have the conversation and the courage to do that, what you found on the other side is what most people will when they take that step. I think, especially when we've discovered something that elevates our lives, you want to share that with people. You want everyone to feel that. It's how you become each other's cheerleaders.
Yes, absolutely.
And you did it when you were stepping so far out of your comfort zone, because, you know, it doesn't sound like that was at all, you know, something that was a huge part of your life leading up, and you're making this, you know, you're transferring that energy into a completely different space. And then you see somebody that's at the pinnacle of that space. And you, I would assume, were very young, because if you're 28 now and this happened, obviously, I don't know, I'm guessing 21, 20?
Yeah, I was 21. So I would have been around 19, 20 years old.
Yeah. So to walk up to somebody and you know, I know you use that term, you know, like I'm very shy sort of thing. And it's that kind of thing. Like I pick my moments. I always think that more of like, people are like, look, I'm going to pick my moments, but what a moment to pick. And the fact that she not only became, you know, that she was open to it, but that she became like a mentor really in her own right. I just, I love, because also, when, you know, society has really put us in positions where we almost like pit each other against one another, is like, well, no, that's the space that I hold here. And so that, you know, I don't want to teach another female necessarily to come, versus immediately she having a more expansive view of that, of like, how can I help? Where do you need? And then giving you the suit.
Yes.
Giving you this suit, and the fact that this is like the traveling pants of the.
That's what I thought of too as soon as I heard it.
Right? I was love it. I feel like I want to wear the suit and try something and just see if it works.
Sparkly.
Yeah.
Right? That's honestly one of my favorite things about competing, is that you got to dress up. Like I emphasize to so many people, especially if they hear it, this is a little diversion, but if you're ever thinking of competing, please know your why and be centered in that ahead of time, because we know, particularly in women and actually for men as well, body dysmorphia, all the things can be very, very real for so many people. So just be very connected to your why. For me, I was like, I never got to do anything like that as a kid. So to dress up, get your hair done, do the things, so down, so much fun.
Chrissy, I love a good sparkle.
I really do. It's an issue that I'm so here for. But when it comes to any division of bodybuilding and competing, we know the level of dedication and how much the pendulum swings, that is your life, is very heavy. So talk me through your journey then into bodybuilding and physical fitness, and then where does it come in where you realize maybe things aren't operating as optimally as you feel they should have?
Yes. So like you said, it really is dedication. And some people can consider it to be quite a selfish sport because you have to be all in 24/7. You're taking into consideration your sleep, the food, the water, the workouts, like mental health, all of it. So I did dedicate my life to it, and I competed provincially, or sorry, regionally in the show that I mentioned that I took first, which was just amazing. What a feeling. To move into competing at the provincial level, where I got fifth place. And at that point, I decided to dedicate my time and energy to learning about food because I was quite privileged and lucky to have my parents cook a lot for me prior to competing. And as you know, Chrissy, once you are competing, you're cooking all the time. And my food that I was making did not taste very well. I remember being at the point where I was boiling chicken in water because I was like,
Oh,
I've done that. With no
like,
salt at the end.
yeah, it was
Oh.
disgusting. It was terrible. So I remember my boyfriend at that time, his brother had went to chef school and he was trying to show me, these are what spices are. These are herbs.
I've been there.
Yeah. So
I've
it's like,
been there.
wow, like what a world. So
Right?
I was
Flavor,
like, you know what?
you're kidding.
Yeah, what a difference it can make, right? Makes life a little bit easier. Get this chicken down a little bit easier.
Oh, yeah.
So I decided to move to Toronto to go to George Brown College for their culinary nutrition program. So it's chef school, but with a focus on healthy eating. So it felt very fitting.
That's
And
cool. Like,
yeah,
that's, not to interrupt you, but I was like, that's really neat that program exists.
yeah, it was an incredible program. Another pivotal moment in my life that just kind of pushed me to limits. If you've ever worked in the industry and being in a restaurant, and you would know exactly what that is like. The goal was to diet for my national show while going to chef school, which was going to be a really big challenge, being surrounded by food and not being able to taste that food when you're dieting. So the plan was to get my fellow classmates to taste my food for me to make sure everything was okay before sending it off to the chef. So in chef school and preparing to compete nationally is when things started to essentially slow down in my body. And I always say it felt like a rusty machine. It just wasn't moving freely and easily as it once was. It started to, there was a lot of tension, and I had to give a lot more extra effort to just do simple movements. So something just didn't feel right. And that's when I started to search for some help.
And so how did that search start for you? Was because we know, especially for women, when they bring up issues in their body, it's not always listened to off the hop.
And that's exactly what happened. I was seeing massage therapists, chiros, physios, you name it. I saw sports med doctors. And at first it was misdiagnosed as it's just tendonitis. You just rest, it'll go away, you'll be fine. And after that, it was misdiagnosed as carpal tunnel. And these were all true symptoms that I was experiencing, but the diagnosis was incorrect, and it was stemming from something a lot deeper.
And at this point, were your plans to do national derailed from this, or were you still trying to make that happen?
In my mind, I believe I was still trying to make it happen, but I knew I could push it a year if need be, but I really wanted to achieve that goal.
Right. You worked so hard for it, right? And that's the hard thing. And there's such a gray line sometimes because, or it's such a fine line, I should say, because there's that, what do you push through? And what do you because of all the work that you've done and all the things that you prepared for. And then it's like, yeah, that's part of life, right? You get these challenges or you get these missteps, and that's also one of the big points to it all. You push through and you achieve the goal. But then there's also this fine line where when you don't allow and listen to your body and honor what's taking place and recognize that life is saying, you know, there's a bigger goal to achieve here that has nothing to do with what your eye is on. And that's where to pay attention to. And it's a big part of your story from everything that we've learned about you from the get-go of the vocal, you know, with the vocals and going at singing. And now you've switched into this different arena and the chef and so forth. So how did you choose essentially, or where did you go from there to say, is this the goal that is still kind of, I don't know whether to say meant for me or not, but is it still the most appropriate and healthiest to my life? Or is this now moving me in a direction that I have to, what did that look like in the end?
I feel like I was not able to step away from this newfound identity of now becoming like an athlete. I think there might have been some residual trauma from losing the ability to sing. And I didn't want to have to, again, find something else to become, because as much as I loved music and known myself as a singer, this newfound identity of becoming an athlete felt so much more, I had so much more passion towards it, and I could not let that go. And I felt almost, and I'm sure anyone would feel like I would be failing myself, and if I had to let this go, especially because there's like a physical component that comes into play too. You don't want to lose like how you've, you know, developed yourself and you put all this work in, and I can't regress. Like there's no way I can go back. I can only move forward. So I never really let that go. And that was almost damaging in a way, because my body was not able to move and function in the way that it once was, but I was still trying to eat like a bodybuilder and think like a bodybuilder. Right.
How did you navigate through that? Because this is a really common issue in the sport, and I think exacerbated for you because where you landed at that point, once again, it was out of your control. Your body was basically giving you an alarm bell saying something isn't quite right in here. So how was particularly the diet part? Because I think that's the biggest thing. And again, not to narrow out women, but it can be exceptionally damaging for women hormonally, like, and cause years of things to resolve. So what was your relationship with food then at that point? Because trying to still eat like a bodybuilder, like people have to understand it's exactly as you said, that's a full-time fucking job.
You're not getting the nutrients to a great extent, correct? Or no? I don't know.
It's a bit of a balance, like definitely toward the end when you're in like heavy calorie deficit at the end, but like through the journey, you're like actually quite concentrated on supplementing correctly. And you probably eat more vegetables than most people do in a year. You have them in a month.
Gotcha.
But definitely toward the end, like full disclaimer, I tell people all the time, like when you see shreddies on stage, that's the least healthy human being. Everyone thinks you look amazing, but you are depleted.
My roommate at one point
too.
Yes.
My roommate at one point was bodybuilding back in college, and before bed, like the week out, she would just start talking nonsense. And I would have to say to her, bedtime, you need to go shut her down. And she'd be like, am I doing it again? And I'm like, oh yeah, it's getting weird. Shut it down. It's because of quite literally, there was not enough. There was not enough nutrients. I was like, I don't know what's going to come after this, but you need to eat something as soon as that comes.
I've thrown a rice cake at my husband. I totally get it. So that's why I'm like going through this once again, identity shift that you're going to be facing, and then trying to still put yourself through a really intense,
rigorous
regimen. What does that look like, especially mentally at that point?
While your body is also saying something ain't right here. That's
It was a very difficult time, and I had started to turn to something that I had never turned to for coping prior to this point in my life. And I had found junk food, which was like out of the realm that I was used to. But the sweets that I would be eating started to give me that same high or like endorphin feeling that I would be getting from working out. So it switched to a very unhealthy habit. And I'd hate to admit like how much money I spent. There was a Shoppers Drug Mart right underneath our apartment in Toronto, and I would be going almost every night and just stocking up on junk food and eating it in bed, and then hating myself afterwards for doing that. But in that moment of eating that sugar, I got that same feeling that you get when you're working out.
Well, and sugar is a drug. There's no
Yes.
doubt about it. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, I literally believe I had a sugar addiction. It got to the point where I'd be hiding receipts, eating in like parking lots before coming home, in the car, like hiding it because I was so embarrassed that it had gotten to that point. It was really bad.
Anytime there's something that becomes all consuming, oftentimes we're faced with the proverbial rock bottom. So where does this go for you? And is there a point that you do start to open up to other people to say, like, I know something's wrong physically, but like also I'm not feeling healthy and well mentally right now?
Yeah, I just felt like the diagnosis that I kept receiving was not accurate, because the therapy that would follow and be given to me for that particular diagnosis, I wasn't getting anywhere. It had been over 2 years of excruciating pain, and I knew that this is not right. So I continued to see different healthcare professionals, and I really attribute my healing journey to this one particular doctor in Toronto who he did some tests, and he basically had me raise my arms above my head and flash my hands open and close. And he felt my pulse, and there was no pulse in either of my wrists. When I had my hands above my heads, I would completely lose my pulse in both of my wrists. And he's like, okay, this looks like thoracic outlet syndrome. So we're going to send you for some tests, get things monitored, and we're going to go from there. So I did more tests and had a definite confirmation of having thoracic outlet syndrome, which I'm not sure if either of you know.
Yeah, I was like, please enlighten us.
Yeah,
Okay.
no, I don't. Yeah.
So essentially, you have a small triangle that's near the base of your neck, which is called the brachial plexus on both sides. And that's like the highway where all your nerves, veins, and arteries run through. And with TOS, you can see that that space gets compressed. And sometimes you might have the nerves being compressed. It could be the arteries. It could be the veins. And typically you're going to see it on one side. It can be caused from motor vehicle accidents. It could be genetic. It could also be due to somebody's job. If they have a very repetitive job, like a hairdresser where they're moving their arms in front of their head, or a secretary typing in front of them all the time. So I had compression on both sides, on not only my nerves, but my veins and my arteries. So I had all three types in both arms. Yeah. So
also, well done on that explanation. I genuinely was like, is she a medical professional as well? Because we're like, this could be. And I was like, this is impressive.
Many times having to explain what TOS or thoracic outlet syndrome is. Yes. That was the best way I had it described to me. So
that was beautiful.
Well, and I liked the analogy of the highway because motorcycles, motivation, but you know, you being on this quest to be like, something's wrong, you finally get an answer. And I imagine now it's a twofold feeling, probably relief because you have an answer, but then
fear.
Also,
because
like,
you have an
super
answer.
fucking scary. Like that feeling of like, well, that sounds fucking terrifying. My major highway is like always under construction at different points for absolutely no reason that I'm aware of. And like shutting,
Yeah, I feel like I didn't even let that fear sink in because it had been so long of not having an answer that it was really just a good feeling to finally know, okay, this is what we got going on. Where do we go from here? So that sports med doctor had said, you have two surgeons. I would recommend you go see this one. Okay, let's go see him. So my mom came with me to all of my appointments. God bless her heart. She was my saving grace through all of this. She did endless nights of research. She had me like in all these forums and chats with other people from across the world who have this like rare chronic illness. So she really helped get me through each day. So we go to this appointment with this neurosurgeon, and we were basically like, where do we go from here? And he said, this is what your life is going to look like, and you just need to limit the use of your arms and consider changing your career path. And my mom said, okay, but what can she do to help? Like, should she see a physiotherapist? Will massage be more beneficial? What kind of therapy should she be doing? And he said, no form of therapy is going to help you. This is just the way it is. And he told me that if I had surgery, I'd be at a higher risk of the surgery not working than it being successful. And he told me, word for word, I will never forget this for the rest of my days, to come back when I became fully disabled.
How do you even begin to process that? Like, when those words land in your ears, what does that look like?
My mom had to carry me out of the hospital. I couldn't hold myself up. I felt like I finally gotten the news and that diagnosis that I needed to move forward with life, and to find out that at 22, 23 years old, however old I was at the time, I struggled to brush my teeth. I struggled to brush my hair and put makeup on. I felt like I was watching everybody continue to live life. And this was just how it was going to be. And anybody who has chronic pain knows that it generally comes with anxiety and depression. So it was a really hard hit. And I didn't really want to continue to live that way. I didn't see that being my life. But I remember making it out to the parking lot of the hospital, and I turned around and I said, absolutely not. And I gave 2 middle fingers to the hospital. Yes. And I said, I promise you that I will show up again, and I am not going to be fully disabled. This is not going to be my story.
It made me think when you said that about like you climbing up this cliff or this mountain and just getting to at least one of the little peaks, and then meeting this doctor, and he essentially just kicked you in the gut right off to land on your back and to tell you don't even bother trying to climb again. And you're like, no, you fucker. Where you get up and the wind's knocked out of you. But that's all I could visualize, is that getting up and be like, nah, I'll climb and I'll get to that top. I just won't stop to talk to you on my way up next time. You got nothing to offer me. You've got nothing to offer me. I'll just bypass that point. Incredible.
What does the bypass look like for you from there? Because it's one thing to have that inner resolve, but you're still facing this reality where the brushing the hair, the doing the makeup, like every day you're faced with this. So how do you pull through, I'm sure, the claws of depression that are trying to keep you low and then still advocate for yourself?
Yes, that is like a key word, is advocating for yourself. And I would always recommend to people, if somebody has told you no, that it's not possible, seek a second opinion. And like I had mentioned, the sports med doctor said, there's 2 surgeons in the area. Go see this one. Okay, he didn't work out for you. Let's go see the second one, whose hospital was actually literally across the street from our apartment in Toronto. Go figure. So I go to see the second surgeon. Mom comes along, of course. And he said to me, if you do not get surgery, you, for lack of better words, could die. Everything was so compressed that I was at a very high risk of developing a blood clot, which we all know can lead to a heart attack, a stroke, an aneurysm. And he had mentioned that the veins were so compressed that they would need to be rebuilt and would have to be ballooned, and veins would be taken from my legs to then replace the veins that were in and around my upper body. And I would need the stents to kind of balloon the veins. So at that point, I was willing to take any risk to hopefully better my life. And we had booked the surgeries. My first one was February of 2019, and then the second one to come a few months later in June of 2019. And it was just like counting down the days until I would go under the knife.
And so what did they do in the surgery? Like you mentioned the stints and such, but I understand there was almost like the game operation, other things moving around. So what did this look like and what was recovery like?
So because that brachial plexus was so compressed, they obviously had to take some bits and pieces out to make space for it. So I have had, I don't know if you can see like my scars here, but they run across my whole neck. I've had 4 muscles taken out of my neck and 2 ribs removed.
How do you feel when you look at the scar?
Yeah.
I love them. My mom was trying to put vitamin E cream on me. She got like scar cream. And I was so excited to take my bandage off to see my scars for the first time, because anyone with an invisible illness knows how defeating it can feel to have nobody recognize what you're going through. I recall an instance where I was yelled at on the subway for sitting in a blue seat, which was the handicap seat. And I was yelled at because you couldn't see that I couldn't hold on to the bars and stand because I would lose all the blood flow in my hands. And anybody with an invisible illness knows that if you can just show like a little piece, even if it's like a cast or a bandage or something, like you finally feel like you have some representation of the pain that you've been going through. So I was beyond proud to wear my scars, and I did not want to cover them up. And I still don't.
Yeah, I love that. I got to ask you during the time, because almost like a little backtracking, when you first got the first diagnosis from the original surgeon, and like we spoke to of, obviously that deep anxiety and then that feeling of I can't do this, almost like the loss, it felt like, of that meaning. Like if I can't do any of these things, then I'm going to be in that crippled state and going into a depression. And then getting the second opinion of surgery and that hopefulness. What did that look like as far as mental health wise? And how did you navigate that? Because it doesn't, just because you get that news, it doesn't necessarily turn it off. If anyone's dealt with any depression or anxiety, it's not just a light switch that goes on and off necessarily. And there's still a lot of fear, obviously, of, is it going to work? I would assume, and not. So what did that kind of look like internally during that process?
I think life had felt so dark for so long that this was like my first glimmer of hope. So I was really holding on to the fact that surgery was going to help. So I kind of didn't even let that idea sit in my mind that this wasn't the answer. I knew either way I had to get the surgery, because not dealing with the problem was only going to create a bigger problem. But with that being said, I definitely still struggled with the intrusive thoughts and the depression and the anxiety. Or I would say it was the most difficult time was actually in between the two surgeries. As I mentioned, one was in February, one was in June. And healing from the surgery was very difficult. I could barely move my arms, and I wasn't able to lift 5 pounds for like 6 weeks after surgery. But just knowing what I had to go through a second time to get that surgery again on the other side,
Right.
that was a really tough time. And it wasn't until after the surgeries that I had a lot of relief, and that pressure and anxiety really lifted. And moving from Toronto also really helped. We moved to my boyfriend's hometown for a few months before moving to Victoria, and being out in nature really helped bring me some peace, because being in the downtown core caused a lot of anxiety and stress as well.
Right.
I think it's so wonderful that we've had you today as well. Just when you were speaking to invisible illnesses like chronic illness in that capacity. And I think it's just it's a good reminder for us as humans that you never know what somebody's lived experience is.
Mm.
And we need to have a little bit more trust and faith in each other. Just when you speak to the blue seed, I find that so devastating, because at no point should you have to justify, never mind be essentially bullied for something that you needed to utilize in that moment. And so bringing your voice to the fact that there are these invisible chronic pain illnesses that transpire is I commend you greatly for that. Because I've definitely had people in my life that have had ongoing experiences like that. And very similarly, even within the own family ecosystem, people would basically roll their eyes like, oh, of course they can't come today. And I can think of nothing worse to have to battle when you know that you're experiencing something and almost having to justify it to other humans. So you're doing amazing work today to basically advocate for others that are maybe experiencing or walking in similar shoes to yourself.
Oh, without a doubt.
I would never want anybody dealing with an invisible illness to feel alone, because it's a very lonely battle. And I get firsthand how you feel like you have to justify everything. I felt like I needed to tell everybody what was going on, because it was almost my apology for not showing up in that physical form that I once was. It was like, this is my reason why I don't look the way I do anymore. And it's because I can't function in the same way that I once could.
I fully relate to that, because I have a sleep disorder that I've had since I was about 16, and it doesn't show on the outside, right? And you feel like you want to explain it away, and you have to explain it at jobs. And then everyone's like, oh, I understand. But then as soon as life goes on, and it inconveniences them in any capacity, all that empathy and consideration is gone, because they can't physically see it. And so then you get, you're lazy, or you're this, or you're selfish, or you're all these things, and you're just trying to survive the day and stay awake. Yeah. You also don't want to keep saying it, because then it feels like you're using it as an excuse. So then it's just this double-edged sword. So you almost get to the point where you just stop talking about it, and you just get better and better at coping, hoping. So I love that you are saying out loud, and that, Chris, you did point that out, because it is the truth. We have all the sympathy in the world. Like you said, you have a cast if you have these things, or empathy. And I love that, how good you feel about the scars. And that's because it is a part of you. It's a part of your story. And how did you find, as far as support goes, because we're kind of touched on moments of lack there, support, obviously major support with your mom. How were ways that family and friends showed up that really stood out to you or really helped in those moments? What was support outside of just the appointments?
I would actually say a lot of the support came from an online community. Like I mentioned previously, there was a Facebook group for people with thoracic outlet syndrome. And although it was small, it was a very tight-knit community. And I became very close with a lot of the people in that support group. And to be able to talk to people who actually understood and who actually knew what you were going through and what that pain felt like, that in itself was very healing, because it's difficult to talk to people who don't understand and haven't gone through any chronic pain before. I'll be the first to admit, I never thought of chronic pain, or really didn't think of people with chronic pain prior to me going through it. And it took that experience of being able to relate and say, I get it and I understand. So I really found a lot of support through the online community. And I did post a lot about it as well on Instagram, and using like the hashtag TOS, or thoracic outlet syndrome. And then I've had so many people reach out, and to be able to share in some success from the surgeries and what life can look like on the other side. I want to be that glimmer of hope for other people that I had a little bit of while going through like my darkest days.
I think it's so cool with the online community, because obviously we speak to the fact that social media and our online lives can be such a distraction from the things that matter, but it's important to highlight the other side of it. I mean, we see it within our own moto community that it can be used as a force for good. And at that point, you're able to open up this global platform where you might be helping somebody that's all the way on the other side of the world, and to have that connection. I think as much as the world of the internet causes so many issues in our lives, simultaneously, it creates these beautiful moments as well. And when you speak to being that glimmer of hope, you spoke of the fact you made the big leap to the West Coast. The nature was calling. You're on Van Island. Tell me about getting on 2 wheels, because you started riding in the spring. This is a whole other meaning of freedom, I imagine, for you, because this is something that I think prior to surgery would not have been possible.
Absolutely not. It definitely, it wasn't even a thought. The only thought at that point was just surviving and getting through to the next day. Up until recently, I had no desire to be on 2 wheels. I recall my boyfriend a year prior saying he wanted to start riding motorcycles. And I was like, no, like absolutely not. You are not doing that. That is terrifying to me. A majority of my family rides, and we all know one person who's had a bad story. So to think of him getting out there on 2 wheels, it terrified me. And I began to think, what is my reason of like being so scared? And I found that it came from like lack of control. And I thought I would never get on the back of a bike because I'm not in control. And once I started to realize that I don't have to be somebody's passenger, I can ride myself, I can be in the driver's seat. That's when I became very interested in learning how to ride.
And so how did it feel to actually take, because it's one thing to have the thought, and then it's another thing to get on and do this. So what was that like for you?
A lot of holding my breath, a lot of not breathing, just like
holy fuck.
But as soon as you start to learn how the machine works and you learn little by little, it's almost like with working out. I can relate it back to that. As soon as you start to see that little bit of progress, ooh, there's a little bit of back muscle. Ooh, there's a little bit of bicep. You become addicted to that process of learning. And that's how it was for me. I remember just looking at the bigger picture and thinking, that's a lot. Like thinking about going off the throttle, on the clutch, switching gears. It was all so much in my mind that I couldn't grasp. But once I got it, it was the best feeling in the whole world. And I remember throwing my hand up in the air, being so excited. And then my mom was like, get your hands back on there.
Like, I'm having a breakfast club moment, or what's that end scene at breakfast? Oh, Chrissy,
I'm like, I'm going to fail this.
Yeah, I was like, never mind. We're doing
culture movie knowledge.
Movie trivia. Movie trivia. Yeah, that's phenomenal. It's funny you were saying about like I don't have to be anyone's pastor. I'm like, from the small amount that we've gotten to know you, as soon as you said, I was like, yeah, Liz, you're no one's passenger at any point. Like, that's very clear. But I love the pattern of no matter what's been taken place where life has really come in and, the life that you knew it to be, your identity around that, boom, breakdown. And you felt that fear, that disappointment, all the things that come with it. But it's very soon afterwards that you really step into the pivot of, okay, well, where do I go from here? Okay, from where do I go from here? Right down to the doctor telling you that I'll see you next time being disabled. And that's crushing. You had to be carried out of the hospital. But shortly afterwards, I got to make another appointment. Where do I go from here? Not even afterwards. You stood up and gave the hospital the finger. Fuck y'all. Fuck y'all. And I love it too, because you're only 28 years old. And so you've seen a ton of life and you've had a ton of experiences, but you're still at a very, like, your brain only fully developed 3 years ago. Like I'm super excited, that we now know you, but I'm also super excited to see, all the things, especially now you've gone through these huge, huge hardships, come out on the other side stronger because of them. I think you're going to be substantial in a lot of other women's lives.
That means a lot because, as you both know, I had a lot of self-limiting beliefs coming into today's conversation, thinking, what do I have to offer? What could I possibly offer? So to hear that really means the world to me. If I could take my darkest moments and all my pain and transform that into something that can help somebody, that will have made it all worth it.
Kind of on that note, I know I gave a little heads up and you've listened, so you know that we do our little motivation.
I went for the high note that day.
Well done. So what's a little tool that people can put in their toolkits to help them through life?
I was thinking about this and reflecting on it since you sent me that email, Chrissy, and I thought, what can I contribute and what piece of advice can I give? And something that got me through a lot of this was visualization and never giving up on that idea and image of who I wanted to be. So visualization can really help you get to where you want to go, whether that's like a vision board or even down to just believing that you don't feel a certain way. I know it might not work for everybody, but I found it to be something that was really helpful for me. And it wasn't until last year that I stopped associating myself and seeing myself as a patient and seeing myself as a badass again. That's when the pain started to disappear and I've been able to work out again. I've been able to pick up a weekend job. It's my Harley job. I dedicate 8 p.m. to 3 a.m. every Friday and Saturday night working at a bar just to save for my bike. And I really attribute visualization to that, stepping away from that identity that I held as a patient and seeing myself as Liz again. So that would be my piece of advice or homework. Visualize that human, that badass that you want to be, and go out and get her.
And you even said, like, I don't know if that works for everybody, where I'm like, actually it does if people actually commit to it, because it's actually about helping to also map your brain, because when you visualize, your brain doesn't really know the difference between actually having the experience. And so gene expression even follows along with it. So you visualizing a healthier version of yourself, you visualizing the person that you want to step into, not only affects how your perspective, therefore, where you're looking to, therefore, how you feel, but you're actually affecting your gene expression, your immune system, your healing, everything.
Yes.
Before we let you go, Liz, we like to fuel ourselves up with a favorite quote or mantra. So what do you have for us?
Yes, I saved one on my phone. Something that just felt right. One of my therapists that I was seeing during all of this, she taught me a lot about Buddhism. So a quote from Buddha just felt right. What you think, you become. What you feel, you attract. What you imagine, you create.
That, my friends, is your motivation.
You've just listened to the Motivation Podcast with your host, Chrissy Van, and me, Lori Joy Kingwell.
Thanks for joining us along the ride. We've got new episodes dropping every Monday, and we're all about community. So follow us on Instagram at Motivation Podcast and visit our website at themotivation.com.
And in the meantime, tanks full and full throttle.